Okay, welcome to the Home and Energy Chats webinar series, episode about backyard composting. I am very excited for our session tonight. I've learned a lot just in the 15 minutes we had during a pre-session, and I think you will as well. My name is Heather Chandler, and I am the owner of Green and Healthy Maine Homes. We have an excellent presentation tonight, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. So I would like to start by sharing a special thank you to our sponsors, including our season sponsor, Senecal Construction Services, now offering net zero ready design build packages in Pownell, conveniently located minutes from Portland, Freeport, and Brunswick, and also a word from our presenting sponsor, Royal River Heat Pumps.
Hi, I'm Scott Libby, owner of Royal River Heat Pumps. A long time ago, the Royal River, like most rivers, was an important part of life, powering mills and allowing a community to grow and flourish. Nowadays, we see what a river can help to create. We believe that ordinary people can come together to make a big difference too. This year, Royal River Heat Pumps will invest our advertising dollars into a new campaign we've launched called Ripple to River. Each month, we'll choose a different nonprofit organization whose focus is kids battling childhood illnesses. We'll tell you about their particular mission and let you know how you can help support them. We're also launching an online resource at rippletoriver.com, providing information and a link for donations. Little things can turn into big change. I'm Scott Libby from Royal River Heat Pumps in Freeport, and I hope you'll join us in making change happen for kids and families that are facing challenges that nobody ever wants to face. Visit rippletoriver.com to learn more and donate, and thank you.
Thank you to both of our Home and Energy Chat sponsors. A quick overview of how the evening will flow. We're going to kick it off with presentations by each of our presenters, and then we will have time set aside for Q&A after the presentations. We did receive several questions through the registration process, and we invite you to contribute questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen throughout the session as anything comes up, and we will do our best to get to all of them. A reminder that the webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our website, greenmainehomes.com, within the next couple of days, certainly by the end of the week. And if you are not familiar with us, Green and Healthy Maine Homes is dedicated to inspiring healthy, efficient, and future-ready Maine homes through a quarterly print magazine, the annual Green Home and Energy Show, which takes place in April. It'll be April 6th next year. We have an online business directory on our website, monthly email newsletters, and an active social media presence where we aim to share expert advice to inspire healthy, comfortable, efficient, and sustainable Maine homes. So please visit us at greenmainehomes.com to learn more. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for the evening. Mark King oversees the Organics Management Program at the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, where he has worked for more than 30 years. In 1997, he helped to develop the internationally renowned Maine Compost School and currently serves as a faculty member and director. He provides ongoing technical assistance to new and existing commercial and agricultural compost facilities through compost facility design, operations assistance, and compost process troubleshooting. He is currently working on a project to promote statewide composting of pre- and post-consumer food residuals as an alternative to costly landfill and incineration disposal. And I'm sure we will hear a bit more about all of those programs. So welcome, Mark. And Nate Cronauer. Nate is an environmental educator at ecomaine. His passion for sustainable waste management began early on, helping his dad make runs to their local transfer station as a kid. He was intrigued by how we deal with our discarded resources and has been hooked ever since. From starting a recycling club in high school to earning a bachelor's degree in environmental planning and policy with a concentration on municipal solid waste management from the University of Southern Maine. He's been fascinated at finding the best environmental and economic solutions to our waste system. So welcome to both Nate and Mark. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mark, who's going to kick off our presentations.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. And I want to talk to you a little bit about one of my passions, which is setting up backyard compost operations. Okay, let's see. So one of the first things that we do is we try to give a number to the amount of food that is wasted annually. And it's really hard to get a grip on it. Maine has done studies in the past. We found it's about 25 to 44% of our waste stream that ends up in the landfill or in the incineration. But the good number to go by is about 150 to 200 pounds for every Maine resident per year. That's a really good number, and that gives us something that we can work with. The most important part is to remember that if they're recovered upstream before they ever make it into disposal, they can be transformed into all kinds of different higher and better uses, which we'll talk about right now. The way that we look at things is an upside down pyramid. It's similar to what EPA has put together, but we created our own in 2016. And if you look at the very top, it says reduce unwanted food. And what that means is that you only cook what you can serve or what people can eat. You only buy what you can feed your family and is not going to expire. And you always look to use leftovers first. There's actually a saying that if you buy Tupperware dishes and you put your leftovers in it, you put a sticky note in the front that says use me first, and you'll find you can be creative and keep reusing food scraps before you create new food scraps. When that can't happen, we look to pay it forward. And one of my favorite things to do is I go to a lot of food pantries across the state, and I like to see what the expiration dates are on their shelves. And some things are about to expire within a month and they're not moving very well. One of my favorite things to do is to encourage them to give it to a different shelter, someone that might be able to find more people that want that material, so it never has a chance to expire before it gets into someone's home. So that's really, really important. But when things do expire and they don't meet the standard, CDC doesn't want people to eat them, we still can possibly look at feeding them to animals. There's a lot of things in our food chain that the animals can eat after humans cannot. But also there's a lot of things like brewer's grains and other material that animals love. And, it's material that normally would get wasted if it wasn't given to animals. When all that doesn't work, then we get to our next level, which is composting or digestion. Those two are considered in the state of Maine to be the same because they're each a beneficial use of material, either producing a soil amendment or producing energy and a possible liquid fertilizer. That's really, really good. When that doesn't happen, we have disposal all by itself. But really, honestly, I need to say that there are many tools in the toolbox, and ecomaine and PERC both actually recover energy from the food that's disposed, that's incinerated. So honestly, they're getting a higher and better use out of it than if it just goes in a hole in the ground. So something needs to be said that disposal is our least favorite option, but of the disposal options, landfill is considered to be the worst. So composting is nothing more than taking carbon and nitrogen and putting it together in the most optimal conditions, lots of moisture and lots of airflow to help facilitate aerobic decomposition. When things work aerobically, the byproducts are carbon dioxide and water vapor. When things don't work aerobically and go anaerobically, they produce what are called volatile fatty acids or volatile organic acids. One of those is like methane is in that same category, and that's 25 times more potent a greenhouse gas than is carbon dioxide. So we try to always make things optimal. The really cool thing about composting is that it will always work no matter what you do. Compost is just going to happen. But if you make it the most optimal conditions, you accelerate the process and you can produce compost faster. And that's all that we're doing. Some of the benefits of composting is it does add organic matter, which is the food of the soil. It feeds the microbes in the soil. It feeds a lot of the macroscopic organisms. It helps keep our soil healthy. For 27 years, I was a paramedic, and I used to tell my students that when you put compost in the soil, it's the same as defibrillating somebody back to life. So it's just a nice way. It defibrillates and re-energizes our soil. It does hold on to water. We found last year we had a pretty severe drought, and a lot of our strawberry farmers use compost in their soil, and they actually were able to not face as much damage as those that didn't have compost because it does hold on to water and keeps it in the root zone. So they did not suffer the drought conditions that many of the other facilities would have. It also can reduce infiltration, which means if you have a really sandy soil, water runs through it too quickly where the nutrients don't get to the plant roots, they just wash down through. So compost actually holds those nutrients around and makes it better. Simultaneously, conversely, if the soil is super dense, compost lightens it up so roots can penetrate and move around and be very happy. So that takes care of that soil compaction. One of my most favorite things that it does, well, there's two that are my favorite. The first is called induced systemic resistance, which means that it actually wakes up the genetic viability of a plant to prevent it from succumbing to certain plant diseases like blight and wilt and things like that. But the other thing that it does is it holds on stingily to all the nutrients. And like an ATM, you have to actually reach in there and get nutrients, take a withdrawal out. So it holds on to them for like months and months and months. Whereas a fertilizer you put on the soil goes right down through pretty quickly. So it's a really awesome thing. So we're going to talk about all these things, but basically it's really simple. Think about when we're composting, all we're trying to do is make the best possible combination of materials. We call it a recipe to get what we need. The first thing is this carbon and nitrogen ratio, and we call it brown to green. There's all kinds of ways to think about it. But what you need to know is that the carbon is the food of the microbes. It's what they eat to thrive. And the nitrogen is what the microbes use to make more microbes. So those two are super important. And we want a balance of around 20 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen to get that right balance to help more and more and more organisms grow in the pile. And we'll talk more about what that means. So carbon is leaves, wood shavings, cardboard. A lot of the bedded manures like husk manure, goat manure, llama manure are my favorite. Cow manure can be good if it's heavily bedded because it's wet and gooey otherwise. So is chicken manure. But if it's in a bedded pack where it's well blended, it's pretty good stuff. And then we also see things like wood chips and corn stalks and straw. The funny one is this next one I'm going to show you. Oops, I don't have it here. So the greens are grass and vegetables and things like that, but grass is a very funky one because it actually can be a carbon source if you let it sit on your field and dry. So what a lot of people will do is they'll take fresh grass and mix it with old grass and make a compost recipe. So it's a really funky one, but as that chlorophyll leaves, it goes from a carbon or a nitrogen source to a carbon source. So it's kind of fun. I love working with stuff like that. Oxygen is super important, 21% in the air. We draw in 21%. We give out 16%. That's why when you give somebody mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, you don't kill them. You're giving them 16% oxygen, of which they only need 5% too. That's the same thing for a compost pile. Every time I turn a compost pile and air rushes in, only 5% is used by the pile. The other 16 is just liberated. So we want high oxygen because if it's aerobic, it's not going to create anaerobic odors. It's not going to create those really high greenhouse gases. So it's really important to just try to keep things optimal. So as I said, it's really important for aerobic decomposition because that's the quickest way to make it biologically stable. This is really cool because people get all excited about the temperature. Oh, it's going to be 160 degrees. It'll kill weed seeds and all that. What they don't get, and I love telling people, is that the temperature is more of an indication that the pile is doing well. If you think about a really small room, let's say you're in a room 8 by 10 with no windows, and you put 40 kids in there, and it's 60 degrees, and you throw a soccer ball in and have them run around, in less than 20 minutes, it's going to be 80, 90, 100 because of all the heat from their bodies is going to get trapped in that room, and it's going to raise the temperature. That's what a compost pile thermometer is telling me. When I reach into the pile with that thermometer and I get 160 degrees, I know I've got a bunch of happy microbes that are constantly moving, and all that energy is coming off as heat, and that heat is trapped in the pile because we created it in such a way that it's an insulated barrier. So that just tells me everything is cool and things are working well. Everything's hot and things are working well. So some of the phases of aerobic compost, you start out with that initial mix. It's cold, maybe 80, 90 degrees. Then as things start to heat up, we go through some mesophilic phase, which is the same as what's in a digester, about 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Then thermophilic is where all the active microbes are doing the work. and that's 110 to 160, and that is about 4 to 6 weeks. And then as it starts to cool down, it heads back to mesophilic. We let it naturally cure, and we may turn it once a month for 6 months to let it finish itself out. So that's the natural fate. And this is a good shot of it right here. You can see that's the whole course of the life of a compost pile. If it's being managed properly, it's about an 8 to 10 week process. And then it goes into curing for 3 to 6 months, depending upon the use. You can use it right away on cornfields and places where active compost won't have a problem. But if you want to use it in a greenhouse, you've got to give it 3 to 4 months to let it finish out. This is a really cool one too. We want the moisture to be around 55%. And people are like, how do I measure that? Well, there's a tool for everything. And unfortunately, moisture meters are a waste of money because they have to be calibrated all the time. The tip dries out and they're very, very expensive. I prefer to use what I call the squeeze test. And that is you grab a handful of compost material and you squeeze it in your hand. If water shoots out your knuckles, it's too wet. If you open your hand and it crumbles to the ground, it's too dry. If you open your hand and it's a moist ball, it's perfect. And that is 55% moisture. You don't need to buy any tools except for a thermometer. The rest you can do with what Mother Nature gave you. This is a cool shot because what this shows is where microbes are happiest. The black is the water film. The big outlined areas are particles of carbon, particles of nitrogen, and then in the middle is a free airspace. And where the water and the particle of food and the airspace interface is where the microbes like to work. But because they don't move, they're stationary, we have to periodically turn the pile and remix it to give them more opportunity to feed and grow and do their thing. So that's why a pile will get hot and then it'll cool down because they're basically running out of food. The minute you turn it, it starts to heat up again. So that's the cycle of composting. Now, in order to maintain airflow, to do things the right way, we have to have a certain particle size. If you look to the pile in the upper left, that's sawdust dust. It's really, really fine particle. That material will sop up water like there's no tomorrow, but it gets saturated and you can't blow air through it. It just gets blocked. So it would be a stinky, stinky pile if we use just that stuff. On the other side, upper, is the big pile of wood shaving area. That one can't hold water to save its life, and whatever the wind blows, it dries right out. So that, it would take forever to compost, but it will compost. It'll just take forever. The one in the bottom is a mixture of fine and coarse. It's going to absorb liquid. It's going to hold on to liquid, but it's going to hold its structure so air can flow through and you can have excellent composting. So particle size really helps determine moisture holding capacity and, more importantly, airflow through the pile to keep it aerobic. This is really one of the coolest pictures I've ever shot, and it just was by happenstance. This was a pile that had 650 chickens in it. They had died natural mortality at one of the local farms. And so we put them in the center. And if you look at the very center, it's dark and steamy. And if you look at the outer edges, there's these two light zones. And what's happening is that that center is so active that it's drawing air into it vigorously, so vigorously that it's actually drying out the outside edges of the pile. And it draws it into the center, uses that oxygen, and then it forces out the top, which we call the chimney. And so that is a beautiful photo of how a compost pile works when it's really cooking. So people ask me, what kind of system should I use? And for the first question I ask is, how much material are you going to compost? What do you want to do? One of my favorites is called the lobster trap wire bin. This is the one that I promote all over the state of Maine. I have a partner that I work with, a company called Brooks Trap Mill, and they're located in Thomaston. They have a facility down by the Casco Bay Bridge. They have another one in Brunswick. They're just really cool people, and they make lobster traps out of this wire. And what I have them put together is called a compost kit, which is a 12-foot section of the wire that's 4 feet wide. You roll it into a cylinder, and then they have little clips called hog clips that hold it together. And on the top, you put a 4-foot square section that becomes the cover, because our number one nemesis in these systems are turkeys. And turkeys like to jump into the middle of them, so the cover keeps them out. But these things work great. And I actually did a study at UNE where I put 4 of these in, and we used food scraps from the college, and we cooked all from December through March. We maintained 140, 150 degrees, because each of these bins, when full, holds 1 cubic yard, which is the magic number to stay warm all winter. So it worked really good. This is a system at a school in Freiburg where they used a couple of these, and they actually wrote a letter to the company saying how cool this would be if they could have them. They didn't have a lot of money, and the company donated these to them. And they've done that across the state to a lot of different schools. They're very, very good people. So what I love about these is it's a galvanized wire coated in epoxy, and I have some 10 years old that still looks brand new. It's indestructible. And this is just the kids having fun. If you have active children, turning compost is a good time. This is not a good thing, but I put this up here because I had some lady come to one of my conferences, and she said, I'm going to, they want like $75 for that kit. She goes, that's horrendously expensive. I'm going to build my own, and you're going to see it's going to work great. And this is what she built. She got the wire at the local Tractor Supply, and it works, but it's just not durable. I mean, she has to keep replacing it year after year after year, whereas the lobster trap bin, you could use it the same one for 15 years in a row. So I told her that her option is not sustainable. It may have been cheaper, but it's not sustainable. And so it didn't sink in, though, because, she's much older than me. And so I was like, oh, agree to disagree. So anyways, some of the tools you can get, I mean, you can go crazy on this stuff. Most of the clients that I deal with, I have a lot of folks that just want to set it and forget it method. I remember that from my days of Ron Popeil and the Ronco items, like his little roasting thing, set it and forget it. They don't want to deal with it. They just want it to make compost. So these guys all summer long fill it, then they go down to Florida for the winter, come back in the spring, and the bottom half is compost. So, it's like lazy lobster, I guess. It's a way to make compost without working too hard, and it works every time. This is another way. I've had a lot of hospitals that don't like the looks of the lobster trap bin. They want something more sexy. So this is basically a 3-bin system. Each one holds a cubic yard, and you fill the first one, then you flip it to the middle, then you fill the first one again, then you flip the middle to the third, and so on and so forth. So you get 3 good turns, and then that material goes into curing. So it makes compost a little faster than the lobster trap bin because you're actively turning it each time. So whatever, this is infinitely more expensive, but some people like aesthetics over functionality, and I'll do whatever people want. This I'm not a fan of, although kids put it together, so I gave them a high five and said awesome. What I do like is they lined it with hardware cloth. If you can see that little silver in there. The reason why I don't like pallets is because junk gets caught down in the nooks and crannies, and it stinks, and then it attracts animals, and then animals infiltrate your pile, and it gets ugly. So, but I'm not going to rain on these kids' parades, but I had them put hardware cloth in, and it is somewhat functional. So you can't down kids. This is one of my favorite things for hyperactive children. If you have kids that just drive you crazy in the summer because they don't know what to do, all these require constant turning. The little black one there is about 3 foot in diameter, and you fill that with compost, and the kids kick it around the yard, and that mixes it and turns it. And so this will make compost a little faster, but at the same time, it doesn't have as much capacity. These only hold about 1/3 to 3/4 of a cubic yard. Open system is my absolute favorite. It's what I do at home. And I love it because this, I use my tractor, and I basically just give it a flip. And basically, it's really simple to do, and I can make a pretty large pile. But a lot of folks don't have a tractor at home, so the bins are much better for them to do. So it's whatever works for you. So how do you get started? This is items that these books I've created over the years. These are available if you send me an email. One is specifically for community-based, and the other one is for schools. But both of them help you step by step get set up with an operation. And I'm glad to give those to people free. And this is a typical compost process flow. Just a second. I fed them, babe. So what happens? The material's brought in. This is really the green brushy material. I like it to be much finer, of course. And then this is what the pile looks like when it starts. So this is actually food scraps and horse manure, my favorite. And then this is what happens after 8 weeks of magic. You notice that it goes from tan to dark brown. We call that gaining humus, meaning that it becomes a more complex compound that holds on to nutrients. And that's what goes into your soil and becomes that stingy ATM that only gives you $10 at a time because it holds on to your money really well, just like it holds on to nutrients. And then this just shows it being put into a manure spreader and fed to the field. So it works really good. This is really cool. When we talk about gaining humus, this is the town of Yarmouth. And if you look to the far right, you see that they're beginning pile of leaves. Nice and tan, looking good. A year later, huge volume reduction through composting, looking awesome. The next year, the stuff that's ready to sell, look how dark it is. That's the gaining humus idea. It goes from tan and light to dark and rich. And that darkness is just as the humic and fulvic acid start to get complicated and mixed into it gets darker and darker. It's a very phenomenal thing to watch. This is one of my favorite schools. This is Massbeast Middle School in Waterboro. David Pope is the science teacher. Mark Fisher is the principal. These guys got it going on. They use a big pile of horse manure. They take food scraps from their cafeteria. They dig into the horse manure, put the food scraps in. They turn it, and they go from horse bedding on the far left bottom, to far right bottom, finished compost. Now, normally they just give this away, but I told the kids that if they want to go to the local farmers market, they can actually have a stand and sell compost at $5 a cubic foot, those cubic foot bags. And if you do that, there's 27 cubic feet in a yard. So they can get $135 a yard by selling it by the bag with a little label about their school. And that can go into field trips and other cool things. So I'm constantly trying to get kids to do that. And then this is just their finished material. See how beautiful that is? Dark, rich. That's the final material. And the guy standing there with the little tag is David Pope. The gentleman running it in the middle is the one that does their landscaping and runs their operations. And then the guy in the black is Mark Fisher, and he's the principal. So very, very cool people. So really simply, when you think about it, you collect your compost material either by the meal or, all at once. I love people to weigh it so they can give an idea how much they pull out of the system. And then I like them to then put it into the pile and work it immediately. It's about a half hour to an hour a day, and then once a week to tend the pile. So, an hour once a week is not that big a deal. This is the town of Farmington and the University of Maine at Farmington. This is all the food scraps that they collected from the cafeteria when they first started. Really cool. And this just shows you the maintenance of the bin. You can see the pallet bin, not a big fan, but as I said, if it's kids, I'll say awesome, love it, just because I don't want kids to be discouraged. But this is my final run here. But this is a project that we started in 2004, but 2005 was our first year of operation. This one's near and dear to my heart for two reasons. Number one, I graduated from here in 1986, and I now live in New Sharon, which is about 12 miles away. But the other reason is the gentleman that ran their recycling center, his name's Ron Slater, he's now passed, was a visionary. And he and I sat down at Java Joe's in Farmington and designed the whole facility on a napkin. And then we got it permitted through the department. I couldn't do the permit because I designed the facility, but we got it taken care of. But let me just give you a short run here. Food scraps were collected in the cafeteria pre and post consumer, weighed up at the Sandy River Recycling Center, and he basically picked them up and brought them to the center and put right into their skid steer bucket and taken down to the site and dropped into a pile of horse manure. And it's just awesome. I mean, the material is so great that we have 3 sales a year. We just recently had one, and we sell out within the first 2 hours of the sale because everybody loves it. And if you look at this design, this was built with money from state planning office, but it's basically nothing more than a 75 by 100 foot pad with waste concrete block push walls, and then the upper corner is the finished compost, and in the middle is the stuff that they're actually working. It's just a beautiful, beautiful operation. And then you ask yourself, when is it finished? How do we know when compost is finished? And the best way is to test it or to compost the heck out of it and do an 8-month process. Either way, you're gonna end up with a good product. So now that we have figured all this stuff out, what do we do? And my philosophy is as they say in the military, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Let's start with a home bin. If you like that, then go to your town and talk about doing home bins everywhere. And then if that works, go to your local transfer station and say, let's do a bigger operation where people can bring food from home and we do it here. So that's how success breeds success. And that's how we get things done. So that's pretty much all that I had. And my friend Nate will be talking a little bit about what ecomaine can do. So I think I'm going to hand it off to him. So go ahead, my friend.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. That was really informative. And so my name is Nate Cronauer. I'm an environmental educator for ecomaine. And ecomaine is a waste management company that sort of takes about a third of the state's municipal solid waste. So that's kind of trash, recycling, and food waste. So we're just going to kind of talk about just a little bit about how ecomaine takes some of that food waste. And here are just some pictures of our facilities. We're designated as a 501c3 nonprofit that's owned by about 20 Maine municipalities, with our founding towns being Portland, South Portland, Scarborough, and Cape Elizabeth. And we opened up back in 1978, just sort of baling all the trash together, recycling, food waste, all that stuff. And we operated a landfill down the road for about 10 years, filling that with the big cubes, and it filled up very quickly. So in about 1988, we built the waste to energy facility to reduce the size of the trash by about 90%. And we're also making some energy out of that. And we'll talk about that in a second. There's our recycling center where we take, sort of all of our commingled mixed materials. And then there's our Asheville landfill. And then to give some perspective on the numbers, about a third of the state's municipal solid waste, which is mostly from commercial and residential sources, that's about 175,000 tons. And then actually about 40,000 tons of recycling. So that's gone up a little bit there. And Mark showed a really good example of the Maine food waste hierarchy. And this is something that we sort of follow at ecomaine, similarly set up by the EPA. This is the waste hierarchy. And I'm sure most of us can probably recognize these three up at the top there. I know reduce, reuse, recycle has been, a tagline for quite a while now, but it actually kind of goes a little bit beyond those three steps, and then sort of focuses on, composting and digestion, waste to energy, and then landfilling. Landfilling kind of being determined again as the least desirable method. You're not really getting any energy out of it. You're not reusing those materials, and a lot of that stuff will take, thousands and thousands of years to break down in the landfill. This is just our mission statement. So one thing that I like about ecomaine is that we manage waste, but it's all basically following the hierarchy. And it's in our mission statement that we are not just, just dealing with trash, not just dealing with recycling, which gives a lot of cool opportunities to venture out into food waste. And sort of at the end there, I'll kind of mention a cool project that we have in the works going on. So, we're in Maine, what happens to our food when we throw it in the trash, right? So if we're not composting, maybe we don't have the ability, or we're saying, hopefully not after today's talk, but, maybe you don't have the ability. So there's really two locations that it will go. One is a waste to energy, incineration facility where it will be burned. And that's, you get some energy, so it's better than landfilling. But again, since we have composting methods and processes, we definitely want to, reduce that food waste that's going into the waste to energy. And again, I think as far as environmental benefit, composting is probably the best thing that we can do in terms of sort of helping fight a lot of the issues of climate change in regards to resource use and emissions. And so this is kind of a picture of a landfill. Obviously, this is kind of a pretty nasty looking image, a lot of pests and vectors that, can carry certain diseases. They get in there, and Mark mentioned with the animals getting into the compost bins, well, they get very easily into landfills as well, which we also don't want them to do. So we really don't want to be putting food in waste to energy or the landfill. So that's why we have all these cool composting methods. I'm just going to play a quick video here. This is actually just sort of or maybe I might not have the video actually, but this is showing the claw crane that we have that sort of picks up, a ton and a half of waste at a time and sort of feeds it into these boilers. It's again, we want to burn all the waste that we can't recycle, that we can't compost, that we can't, donate. That's one of the best parts of my job, is I get to go and speak at, talks like this, and go to schools a lot and teach kids about waste diversion as a whole. So, and Mark kind of mentioned that methane piece. So when organic, material like our food waste breaks down, sort of layered by layers and layers of trash, that methane builds up. So it's not being exposed to air. And Mark mentioned methane being about 26 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. So, think about all the landfills all around the world, all the food waste that's kind of, sitting in between those layers. And I can't help but think of, they've done like landfill mining, where they found like packages of hot dogs from, 30 years ago that were still relatively intact. And hot dogs, are probably pumped full of preservatives, but it also kind of reinforces that testament of the lack of breakdown of that organic material. And so I like that Mark had our Maine state one. I have just the sort of more broad food recovery hierarchy. And again, I like how the Maine state one has the kind of more extensive steps, basically landfill incineration. Again, Mark mentioned the waste to energy. We're getting energy. That's always better than putting it right in the ground. But, what's really cool is as more people become aware of the benefits of composting, we're seeing a lot of cool collection, a lot of interest in towns and citizens who are trying to get their own systems involved, which is really cool. So Mark did a great job going through that, so I'll kind of keep on going. And so I kind of want to mention, these are just some of the sort of the bigger composting collection companies. There's sort of a lot of, we compost it now as a part of AgriCycle. Scrap Dogs is kind of in like the, Camden area, and Mr. Fox is located down in Kittery, Elliott, Maine area. So they do a lot of servicing of, the seacoast. Garbage to Garden is a big common one in the Portland and Greater Portland area. And then AgriCycle is actually who we partner with to collect a lot of the food waste through anaerobic digestion, which I'm going to talk about right here. So I think the best way to deal with food waste is if you can have the space and, the time, do it in your own backyard. If you don't have the space in your own backyard, try and build some community, go to your local transfer station, advocate for these systems. Mark and I are obviously into compost, so they know that we're on board, but when, the residents of the town go forward to their town councils and sort of express that, things usually get going. But so let me kind of explain the anaerobic digestion method. Basically, you have your organic waste. So, and it's mainly food waste and food scraps. We can't really use like wood and other brush materials because those don't quite break down well enough. And I know that sometimes they just, again, we're sort of trying to digest that up into like a slurry or kind of like a soup type material. And so you mix that sort of nitrogen-rich material in those food scraps with manure. And again, Mark did a great job of kind of explaining the mixing of manure there. And they go and are stored, sort of collected by the AgriCycle haulers, and then they store it at ecomaine at just one location. We store that for them to then take up to their anaerobic digestion facility in Exeter, Maine. And so they actually have 3 tanks up there, but these are the 2 main larger ones. And they're both about 32,000 gallons. And this is just a pretty simple infographic. So we're sort of promoting that methane. So normally in a static pile or another sort of backyard composting method, you would want to aerate it to avoid that buildup of methane. But in this, they're actually promoting it. And then they're harnessing that methane as biogas, and they actually power their facility, and they're left with the sort of liquid sort of fertilizer, and then the biosolid that they use for cow bedding. I've actually been up to this facility. It's pretty neat. It can be a pretty smelly operation, as I'm sure Mark can attest to with all the experience with compost, but it's definitely an interesting way to capture a lot of the food waste that might be more difficult to backyard compost. And so again, we're kind of talking about the windrow style or the backyard pile. Again, Mark is, I would say he's the foremost expert on composting. So he did a really great job at explaining all that. And I'm sort of kind of mention a couple of those methods as we go forward. And I sort of want to mention, actually, I'll go back to the digestion. I think a lot of digestion is useful for places that won't take the time to take certain food waste out of packaging, like, expired cream or, a bunch of spoiled bags of lettuce at the grocery store. I'm sure that if we've been to the grocery store, we know that everywhere is short-staffed. And unfortunately, a lot of this stuff ends up kind of being pushed down the priority list with dealing with, they say, oh, food waste, that's just trash, just throw it away. But obviously, like-minded people like us know that there's much better options out there. But I kind of wanted to, we actually, ecomaine diverts about 6,000 tons of food waste a year through that partnership with AgRecycle. And this is actually from a DEP report that I really wanted to include. This is just showing some of the anaerobic digested tonnage in composting. It's kind of full, but we've kind of seen some trends here of going upward in food scrap. So that's good. I think we're seeing more awareness around collection. And yard waste is kind of seemed to dip down, but I think that I don't know the answer for that. Maybe Mark has something to include there, but again, so these are some of those windrows. I like these big windrow turners just because, again, it's kind of a large scale. You can turn a lot more stuff. But this is good for, again, areas that might struggle with having the space to do their own, so they can have a service come or, do the town collection. And so again, we see a static pile. We like that, although after Mark's talking, I don't think they have the proper wire in there. So maybe I should take that picture out. But there's a good example of that compost turner. Again, I've had one of those in the past, and those are really a lot of fun. You gotta, it's a good opportunity to get outside and just kind of enjoy being outside. And then vermicomposting is using those worms to kind of help aid in the breakdown of that material. I was actually helping Westbrook Middle School with a vermicomposting project, and they actually were doing pretty well. They have a little compost garden space that they've been working on, and I actually saw their little bin with the worms, and they were all pretty active. A couple lost worms along the way, but that's kind of how it goes. Yeah, so I wanted to include a kind of a thing about compostable plastics, and it's pretty tricky that we're sort of trying to take a disposable item and replace it with another disposable item that's sort of, using resources that might be allocated to another, maybe a food source or something. But a lot of these compostable plastics, they either get mistaken as plastic. One, they're not really recyclable. They're too small to be sorted at ecomaine. And they're usually, the regular plastic ones are usually pretty low quality plastic. And I hear that a lot of the produce bags, a lot of the compostable utensils really don't break down well in most of these processes. I think garbage to garden will take some of the compostable stuff. But for the most part, and again, feel free to chime in, Mark, if there's any sort of update on that. But for the most part, we try to, get people to use reusables instead, really avoid the single-use disposable stuff. Again, I think this is from an old, I think it was the 2011 waste characterization. And Mark had a great one that was broken down a little bit more. But, basically compostable waste makes up a huge part of, every, the average household that isn't composting makes up most of that waste. We have this, obviously not 50%, but kind of goes back and forth. So again, we're trying to turn all of that and basically get it away from waste to energy into more composting systems to avoid that methane buildup. And that's just sort of the Recyclopedia, that's just a recycling app. You can check that out if you have any recycling questions, but I just kind of like to include that in all the presentations there.
Thank you both. That was a fantastic overview. I know it generated lots more questions. I thought in summary, it would be good to start with what are your biggest tips and recommendations for people who want to just keep it easy and compost at home? Like, what is the simplest setup that's not going to take a lot of time? I know, Mark, you had said a half hour to an hour a day. Seems like a lot of time to me. Maybe some others feel the same way. So I'm just curious, what are your best tips, and what's the best setup for folks who don't have that much time?
I find that some people, if they want to do something really simple, they rake their leaves every fall, and they rake them over to the edge of the woods, and you can just dig little holes in the leaf pile and bury your food in it, and let Mother Nature take it over. That's the simplest way, but sometimes people feel like that's just putting stuff off to the side. That's why the lobster trap bin is really kind of the most basic system that's going to contain it and optimize it. And so the people that really want to try and home compost, I steer them in that direction. And it's pretty simple. What I don't like are those little earth machines, those little black plastic things. They just don't have enough volume. They don't have enough aeration. And what happens is that the people that are successful with them go in there and just are always constantly turning it and working it instead of doing what the company says, which is fill it and forget about it. So it's just they don't work well. But so keep it simple, pay attention, and don't make it so burdensome that you don't like doing it. If you're not having fun doing it, don't do it.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, Nate?
No, I would say that, again, sort of the best way is to do it yourself in the backyard. I think another point is, some issues is like transportation, right? The more hauling that we have to do. I mean, compost is really heavy, it's smelly, it's wet. So if you can try to minimize transportation, more, regionalized, local composting methods. So, start in your backyard, or, doing a local transfer station. And again, it builds community again. So you find those like-minded individuals and you can really help sort of grow something from that. So pun intended, yes, there.
There you go. There you go. And I am going to be working with ecomaine, hopefully this fall we've been doing workshops all over the state about what we call consolidated collection, which is where communities collect food at receptacles like garbage to garden, but they collect the food and then it either goes off to somewhere to be processed or they process it locally. And one of the places that I thought would be awesome is to do it out of the ecomaine Learning Center and stream it to all of their communities simultaneously. And so Nate and I are going to work on that together and do sort of a team presentation to try and do that workshop with all of the potential ecomaine residents we can.
Nice. So with that lobster trap system, in the photo, you had two of them side by side. Is that the best, so that you have something that you can then transfer the first mix to for a home setup?
It's more for the volume. This was a school that had a couple hundred kids, and the extra bin was necessary because when the first one fills, then you got to start another one. A 2-bin system is what most people's homes also will accommodate, but some people only. So one of the things that we're doing with this community-based composting is we have people composting just at home. We have people that are composting just at the transfer station, and then we have people that are doing spring to summer composting at home. And then in the winter, they don't want to go out in their backyard or shovel a path. So in the winter, they bring it to the transfer station where it goes into an active pile. So the idea is that if you're only going to compost just fair weather, so to speak, then you might just need 1 bin. But if you want to try to compost year round, you might need 2 bins. So one of the services that we do is we'll actually look at what you have for food scraps, and we'll try to target the best system for you.
So we can contact the Maine Compost School for that?
Yeah, you can contact me at the DEP. I'm the manager of the program, and I'm also the worker of the program. So right
Nice.
now
That's a
we're
great
hoping to get more people, but right now I've been doing it for 30 years.
So I may have missed it, but how often, so with a home compost system, so let's say you have 1 lobster trap set up, how often do you recommend that people are turning that? Is that a once a day, or is that a once a week?
It can be basically whenever you add food or whatever you want to do. If you'll notice, one of the tools I had looked like a cane, and it had two little silver things on it. Those silver things are on hinges, and they do this. When it goes down into the compost, they stay together, but when you pull it up, they open, and it's called a wing digger. And what that does is you can punch it into the top of the pile, and when you pull it out, it rips it open and gives more aeration. So sometimes that's the best way. When you get stuff concentrated in that bin, it can get packed in pretty tightly. And if you get in there with a pitchfork, it can be hard on your back. So I tell people to turn only as they feel it's not going to cause any physical injury to themselves, because sometimes you can just wait till spring for compost.
And so if you're doing that process where you're using the wing dinger, so it's called the wing dinger.
Wing digger, yep.
Throughout the warm season, are you basically then just letting it kind of continue to cook through the winter, and then in the spring, theoretically, it might be ready to harvest and put in the garden?
Yeah. And so if you take like a pitchfork, or what I call a spade fork, which looks like a shovel, but it's just 4 prongs that are thick, and you work it, you'll actually make compost faster. So you can actually make compost in 2 months, as opposed to waiting all winter to the spring. But it can be backbreaking work, and I don't like to put people there unless they want to do it.
All right, I'm going to turn to some of these questions. I don't want to hog all the question time. So somebody asks, they have a barrel composter, and they are wondering how to get the compost out of it, since they are forever putting new scraps into it. So what's your recommendation for somebody who has that style of composter?
I was actually just in Mercer on Sunday. A nice lady who has a barrel system and one of those little kind of tumblers you get at Sam's Club. And she was telling me, she goes, I never get any compost out of it. I'm constantly adding to it. And I said, well, that's the problem. You've got to add to it until it's semi-full. Then you got to set it aside and let it naturally work, and not keep adding. Because as you keep adding material, it just keeps bringing more material that needs to be composted to it. So one of the most important things about a compost pile is it has a defined end, and then you start a fresh one. So that's the real big trick. So I tell people, when those bins get full, set them to the side, turn them once a week, keep checking the color, and when it's nice and dark, harvest it.
So it is really helpful to have more than one so that you can trade off.
It is, yes.
Okay. This question is, do you have any thoughts on location for compost, and also inclusion of shellfish meat in terms of a smell or attraction of critters?
Okay, and I'm glad that you asked that question, because someone had asked about bears in a previous question sheet. And here's the most important thing to learn about composting. That is that liquid is your enemy, because liquid is where odor is. If you absorb the liquid into your amendment, let's say horse manure, for example, it takes away the odor, it takes away the attractiveness, and it helps it compost that much faster. So what I tell people, if they're going to do a home bin and they don't have any natural carbon sources, to find any friend that has a horse, has an alpaca, has a guinea pig, or has rabbits, or any of those animals that kind of urinate and then create the puck kind of feces, because that material is always biologically active. And the minute you put your food in, which is 80% water, it gets absorbed, it doesn't smell, and you're not going to have animal issues.
Would leaves work? So what you already have in the yard, would that work as your carbon?
It can. The problem that I have with leaves is that they tend to shed water, and they don't absorb super well, and they flatten out when they do get wet. So we actually had a facility in southern Maine that we shut down because it had rats and odors that were just unbelievable. What I do instead is I take leaves and I mix them with grass clippings and get a good hot pile. Then that's what I put inside my compost bin. Leaves, so cooking compost will be great. So leaves, when mixed with grass and turned into a hot active compost, perfect for your bin. But leaves by themselves, a little troublesome.
Okay. Anything else you want to add about the bears? So the question was, how can I compost with bears in the area?
The biggest thing is just have lots of amendment. And I only use horse manure or like chicken manure from the birds that are allowed to free range, so heavily bedded. And what happens is that smell is not attractive to bears or deer, and so they'll leave it alone. And if you use enough of it, the way that we use those bins is they have about a 4-foot diameter. I have 6 inches on around the inside, right? So between the inside and the outer edge, I leave a 6-inch layer of just nothing, and the food goes in the middle. And then when you put more manure on, it creates an envelope that seals off the odor. And I don't have any trouble with bears. I have bears bother my bird feeders, though, unfortunately. So that's how I know when they're around, because I'll spend about $200 on bird feeders.
Country living.
Yes, very much.
You talked a little bit about, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here. Actually, let me go back to another question. Is there anything that we shouldn't put in a home compost pile?
Oh boy, there's a lot of things. And people are going to think this is sacrilegious, but we definitely don't want glass. We don't want plastic. We don't want, and this is going to sound weird, but I don't like anything that says compostable on it, because those things only break down in a commercial system that's 160 degrees for 6 weeks. But more so, we're finding a ton of those are full of PFAS, those forever chemicals. So I only want food scraps in my pile. But in a home bin, we don't add dairy, we don't add fats, and we don't add meats, not because they won't compost, but because they compost slowly and they let off odor before they start to compost in those little bins. In a bigger pile, like if you had a 10-yard pile, I would tell you put anything in there. That's organic. That was once a food source. But yeah, we won't even put paper. The only paper that I will allow people to put is some coffee filters, because those are supposed to be PFAS free. But paper plates and napkins, we're finding those contain PFAS too. So it's really frustrating that things that should be compostable are full of forever chemicals. So it's very frustrating.
That's helpful.
I'm glad I didn't mislead everyone on the compostable utensil thing. That was yeah. Sort of as Mark mentioned about the PFAS, that's kind of a huge issue across waste management as a whole, our food waste as well. I sort of forgot to mention about the depackaging element of the anaerobic digestion. So we will take a lot of the, containers of food, spoiled food with the food still in it, and they actually will take it up to the AgriCycle facility with sort of an auger screw depackager, which sort of crushes out the food waste and separates the containers. They actually send those sort of mangled containers back to ecomaine to put in the waste to energy, so at least they're not being landfilled. But there are definitely concerns around microplastics, PFAS, and that's sort of something that I was just another great presentation from Mark at a conference recently, talking about all sorts of things related to compost, some of the PFAS issues. And it really, Maine is actually, I would say, the leader in dealing with the PFAS issue. So everybody pat themselves on the back a little bit, thanks to, work done by Mark and the DEP and a lot of other individuals who have been, really trying to get after and find ways to phase out, PFAS in the products and hopefully, control it in our waste systems too.
Thank you for adding that. Those are helpful tips. We are just about at time, but I did want to ask you, Mark, about that photo behind you. So we had a little conversation again in the pre-session, and you did mention in one of your photos, you did mention composting chickens. So that sort of is a good entree. Can you tell us what's going on in the photo behind you?
Yeah, this is so in 2014, I became a subject matter expert for the USDA. And one of the things that we do is we train other veterinarians and other USDA folks to compost mortalities during disease events or during like a natural disaster like floods and things like that. And so the class is a 3-day class, and these people come in, they learn all the art and science of composting, how to manage mortalities, how to get a farm set up for composting. And then we actually do some hands-on where they get to wear the Tyvek suits and they get to actually help build piles and get dirty. So this is just one of our classes, and we use multicolored tape to make it a little more fun. But the idea is that you put on the Tyvek suit and then you tape all the openings to protect you from this virus or other organism getting into your body. And then you wear a respirator, which they didn't have because it was more of a plaything, and you go in and you do your work. And so it's a serious thing, but it's an opportunity to learn something and have fun doing it.
And it breaks down the same to compost that you could then put on a garden.
You're gonna, well, actually, what we do is we turn it into compost that they put right on their fields. What's
Huh.
really unique about poultry composting, because we do so many birds, I was at a site that had 1.2 million birds that had to be put down. The farmer puts it right back on the fields to grow corn and other things, and it's a super nutrient rich compost.
And the
So
disease is gone from the composting
the
process.
disease dies at 90 degrees.
Huh.
So, and plus the organisms in the compost eat it. So yeah, so no, we wipe it out pretty well.
Interesting. Well, we are at time. Nate, do you have any closing additions, any comments, anything you want to mention that we didn't touch on?
No, I don't think so. I just want to thank you for having me. This is really, I learned a lot. I'm always learning more too. So yeah, thanks. And hopefully we can be a part of some more in the future.
Excellent. And Mark, any final comments? Anything you want to add?
Thank you very much. And anybody that wants any of our educational stuff, just shoot me an email and I'll be glad to get it to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So thank you again to our sponsors, Royal River Heat Pumps and Senecal Construction Services. Thank you to Rain Rayner, who's been handling everything behind the scenes, making the session flow smoothly from start to finish. And thank you again, Nate and Mark, for sharing a little bit of your almost summer evening with us. I know it's a beautiful night out there, so I really appreciate you being here. This is the last session of our spring season, and we'll be kicking our webinars back off in September. So if you're interested in hearing about future topics, I invite you to check out our website, greenmainehomes.com, sign up for a newsletter. If you don't already receive that, you can do that on our website. And if you do have any questions we didn't get to today, both Mark and Nate have agreed to allow us to share their contact information. So we'll be sending that in a follow-up email with the recording from tonight. So if you want to catch any parts of it again. And lastly, you will see a brief survey pop up when we close the webinar. We love hearing your feedback and also any ideas to help us craft our future programming. So thank you again for being with us, and hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. I'm excited to get out there and set up a system here. I've been using a composting service, but as you were going through the numbers, I was thinking, what I pay a year for that composting service, I could buy a couple of those bins and I'd be saving a lot of money. So thank you and have a great evening. Bye-bye.